Madam City Manager, will you please introduce the workshop?
Yes, this afternoon, this is our first of 4 budget workshops related to the fiscal year 2018-2019 proposed budget. Today's workshop will start with an overview of the budget and presentations on administrative departments. With that, I'll turn it over to our Finance Director, City Treasurer, Debbie Moreno.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. As City Manager indicated, we'll start off with a citywide overview and then preview of the general fund and our administrative departments. At the 3 remaining workshops, you'll hear from each of our operating departments. The numbers presented herein are preliminary and will be finalized in the coming weeks. I'll start with an economic outlook at the national, state, and local level and share with you the preliminary fiscal year 2018-19 citywide and administrative departments budgets, and end with a summary of input we have received from our community outreach efforts. The U.S. economy has experienced steady growth in recent years, and the current economic expansion is now the second longest on record. U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP, is expected to grow by 2.9% in 2018 after robust growth in 2017. Nationally, we have reached what economists refer to as full employment, with job openings at an all-time high. A key driver in the economy will be business fixed investment, which is an investment in equipment, intellectual property, and structures. These investments will be necessary as companies will need to invest in labor-saving technologies due to the labor shortage. The general economic outlook is very bright. Economists believe we are near the peak of the current economic expansion, but it's difficult to know when we will have reached that peak. No one is predicting a recession in the next 24 months, and the economy is expected to continue to grow into 2019 and 2020, but at a less robust pace. Throughout much of the current economic expansion, California has outpaced the nation and many states in terms of economic growth and job gains. This is expected to continue in 2018, with California hitting its lowest unemployment rate since 1976. Wage gains have accelerated in recent years. Average weekly wages in California increased by 4.7% in 2017, the largest increase in the last 10 years. Steady job growth and limited increases in the labor force will keep the unemployment rate low and push up wages for nearly all workers. While unemployment is at an all-time low of 3.1% in Orange County, job expansion has continued and incomes are rising. Orange County is experiencing a building boom, with 19,000 apartment units being built this year and more expected in 2019. More detached homes are also being built. The leisure section continues to grow, with the biggest investment in new Orange County hotels in nearly 30 years. Hotel occupancy peaked in 2015 and has barely dipped even with the addition of new rooms. Leisure employment continues to grow as well.
I'm just going to, I don't know, disagree with you on one thing you said, that you said that nobody's predicting recession in the next 2 years. Some people are. Maybe that might have been a...
My apologies. None of the major economic forecasts that we've attended in the region are projecting that.
Okay, thanks.
Now we'll move on to the fiscal year 2018-19 preliminary proposed budget. Citywide uses total $1.9 billion. Budgeted uses by fund include expenditures and transfers to other funds. Highlighted on this chart is the general fund, which makes up 22% of budgeted uses. We focus most of our attention on the general fund because this is where the bulk of our discretionary funding comes from and is what's used to fund our core services. The remainder of funds are mainly restricted for a specific purpose and are not available to general city services. The general fund preliminary budget will be the main focus for this presentation. The preliminary budget includes a full-time complement of 1,945 full-time positions across all funds. We're focused on maximizing efficiencies and resisting the temptation to expand the workforce in times of prosperity. New positions added in recent years have been limited to the provision of public safety services including the Council's 40 and 4 initiative and staffing for the Ponderosa Park Family Resource Center. The orange dotted line represents the level of staffing that would have had without privatizing services. While these positions were eliminated, the services were not. The general fund is the main repository of tax revenues and discretionary sources of funding. Our big three revenues, transient occupancy, sales and use, and property taxes, make up nearly 80% of the general fund sources. The largest source of revenue is transient occupancy, or TOT, at 39% of the total. Sales and use tax generates 21%, and property tax makes up 18%. Business license fees, permits, transfers from other funds, and other revenues make up the remaining 22%. As mentioned previously, TOT is the largest single source of revenue in the general fund. The tourism industry remains strong in Orange County and continues to grow in Anaheim. The preliminary proposed TOT budget is $162.5 million, an increase of 3% from the current year projection, or almost 4.5% from the fiscal year 2017-18 adopted budget. 3 new hotels are expected to open in 2019, the Element Hotel, the Cambria Suites, and a new Hampton Inn and Suites, adding over 700 rooms to our current supply. Even with the addition of these new hotels, we expect our already high occupancy level of over 80% to grow slightly, along with increases to the average daily rate. For 2020, it is expected to be an exciting year with the opening of Disneyland's Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and the first of our 4 Diamond hotels. In our 5-year assumptions for TOT, we've included the addition of 3 new 4 Diamond hotels beginning in 2020. For those 3 hotels in planning stages, in the earlier planning stages, we have estimated that 50% of the new TOT will be realized through year 4 and 75% realized in year 5. Next is sales and use tax, which is a tax applied to the sales of tangible personal property. Sales and use tax is projected to be lower than the adopted budget by $1.4 million or 1.6%. This is largely the result of an adjustment from last year, resulting in a decrease to the county pool. The preliminary proposed budget is $85.8 million, an increase of 5.6%. Economic growth is expected to continue across all sectors, with the largest increases projected in food products, construction sales, and general retail. Last of the big 3 is property tax. Property tax is estimated to be slightly lower than the adopted budget. The preliminary proposed budget is $76.4 million, an increase of almost 5% from the current year projection. Now that we've seen where the revenue comes from, let's take a look at where the money goes. General fund uses include services, economic development, debt service, and capital outlay. You'll notice that the biggest piece of the pie is services at 79%. Services include labor or personnel costs, including full-time, part-time, and all related benefit costs, as well as other operating expenses, including office supplies, equipment maintenance, contract services, and other costs of doing business. Debt service expenditures represent the repayment of principal and/or interest on borrowed funds and make up 20% of the general fund uses. The majority of the debt service is transferred out and paid through restricted debt service funds and is largely related to the resort bonds and convention center expansions. Capital outlay represents the purchase of office equipment, furniture, computer hardware, and vehicles that are funded by unrestricted sources and make up less than 1% of general fund uses. The remaining 1% is used for economic development programs, including incentive agreements and activities designed to grow the economic engine of Anaheim.
On that economic backup development, what are those? So that's roughly $4 million a year, 1%.
It should, I believe it's roughly. Yes, correct. Half of that is roughly for existing agreements, and half is for the continued economic development activities.
So what would the agreement? I mean, I didn't know that there were any agreements in effect yet.
We have the Doubletree Garden Walk sales tax.
Doubletree, Garden Walk sales tax, how much are those? I'll get those later. I'm sorry to interrupt you. You got the flow, interrupt your flow there.
So this slide highlights our services portion and shows the detailed breakdown by functional groups. Of the services provided to the Anaheim community, the largest share relates to keeping it safe and includes police and fire. Departments focused on ensuring the quality of life make up 17% of the services slice. Public Works and Public Utilities maintain our infrastructure and make up 7% of general fund services. The remaining 10% is associated with administrative departments who ensure that our operations are supported efficiently and effectively. You can see here our 5-year forecast as it was adopted last year. Highlighted in green, you can see we expect to break even with sources just slightly exceeding uses. We were anticipating some challenges in the out years as PERS rates continue to grow. Consistent with our mid-year projections, we're not anticipating much change in the current year. Revenues in total may be slightly higher than budgeted, but we expect expenditures may also be slightly higher, so that the ending balance is projected to be the same. Here you can see our 5-year preliminary forecast. Highlighted in orange is the fiscal year 2018-19 preliminary budget, which is balanced without consideration of fee adjustments. Revenues continue to grow, but they're barely able to keep pace with PERS increases from both the discount rate change and the actuarial assumption changes. These increases range from $1.1 million in fiscal year 2018-19 to almost $12 million in fiscal year 22-23. The forecast preserves existing service levels, but does not allow for new or expanded services. If any of our assumptions on hotel development don't materialize, we may need to make adjustments in future years. We have used our best professional judgment to put together a forecast that, when all things are considered together, is the most likely scenario overall.
I have a question on that point, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Murray?
When you say if our projections on hotel development don't materialize, what hotels not developing would have the greatest impact?
The most impactful would be the new Disney hotel with the highest ADR.
So if that hotel were not to be built, it would have the greatest economic impact on the city of Anaheim.
At this time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe if you explain that in more detail. The economic impact on the city of Anaheim as far as our budget's concerned?
That hotel is expected to generate, because of its high ADR, the most of any of the new hotels that are coming online.
Okay, so are you talking about revenue, but expenses, if we're given it back, let's say giving it back, not give it back. If let's say if you get $17 million in revenue and we pay them $15 million in revenue, is it still the biggest economic engine?
I believe that number is still the largest of what is, if it doesn't develop. Yes.
So just that 10% of the tax that we keep is the greatest. I'm surprised at the answer.
Yes.
Okay.
So Debbie, so the budget projections are based on a hotel that's not built yet. We're building a budget on something not built yet, or?
One of the conversations that came up last year, right, was that we weren't considering those things that were in the pipeline. So we have included, our consultants have looked at what is currently under construction and what is very likely to be built. And so those were in the base projections that they provided to us. We also know that there are some other things that may be developed. So the Parkview Inn, 1601 South Anaheim, and the Second Garden Walk, they may be built, they may not. So what we did was we included those at only a 50% likelihood in the out years, with 75% in that last year, because it likely will be the timing that gets pushed out. And then there likely could be other things that would replace it too. So we thought that was the most reasonable approach.
So just to be clear, and I think this is the question I think that the councilman was bringing up for me is, so if this hotel is not built, we'll be in the deficit, in a budget deficit?
None of those hotels start to come online until 2020. So there's no immediate impact.
Okay.
Let me ask this question. So you maybe go back to that slide where you mentioned it rather quickly, where showing our TOT increases. Very first, I think it was the second slide you showed, the very second slide. Okay, so this year we're at 157.7, correct? And next year we go to 162, correct? Is there any of so to get to 162, that roughly 5 million increase, is there any hotels that were built? Does this include any hotels that get the subsidy to get from 157 to 162?
No, none of the Four Diamond in the program or in the first year.
So it increased 5 million without any hotel subsidy. Okay, so then went from 162 to 170, going up 8 million. Was there any hotels that came online with subsidies there?
Just a very small amount there.
Okay, so like not close to none?
It's $250,000.
Okay, so 0.2. Okay, so that 8 million, so 5 million, it goes up 5 million with hotels with no subsidy, then goes 8 million with no hotels with no subsidy. Then the next year from 170 to 180, what happens there? Is there any hotels that get built with a subsidy?
Yes, $1.5 million
1.5 million
is the net remainder.
Well, we're talking revenue, so the revenue, what's the revenue that gets us to 180? Because one's revenue, one's expenses, so all the revenue comes in.
These are shown net of the subsidy, and so that is 1.5 million. Without it, if you took it prior to the subsidy, that would be a $15 million increase.
Okay, so 1.5 million in net subsidy. So if you didn't have the subsidy, then we would go from 170 to 179, 170.7 to 179. Take away the 1.5 million.
Correct.
Without the hotel. So that hotel, and which one is that one that you're talking about?
The three,
The Disney?
the JW Marriott, Westin Anaheim, and the Fourth Disney.
So those all produce a net of 1.5 million?
It's only a partial year for some of them.
Okay.
So they start to layer in.
Okay, so
they start to net 3 million.
okay, so the net there, so there's 170.7 to 179 for just increase naturally from hotels without subsidy, and then a 179 to 180.5 because of the subsidy hotels, right?
Say that again, please.
So we go from 170.7 still and if we didn't build those other hotels, we would go to 179 if those hotels were not built.
Correct.
Okay, and with them being built, then you go from 179 to 180.5.
Correct.
Okay. So then so far, all that growth from 155 to 180 to 179, what's that, 179 divided by minus 155 is 24. So 24 million without growth, without any hotel subsidy, hotel being built. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. So then 2020, 2021, it goes up to 1.5 million to get, because a part of it, we start getting some of those hotel subsidies net. So we get to 185. Then we go from 185 to 187.7. And how much of that is coming from the net of the hotel of the 4 hotel subsidies being built?
2.7 million.
2.7 million. Okay, so this is kind of crazy. Okay, so 2.7. So then we go 2.7. So without it, it would normally go up to 185. So from 180. So 185. Okay, so and then from 187.7 to 195.9. How much of that is coming from the hotel subsidy?
3 million.
3 million. So there's, it'd be 187.7 to 192, no, 193 roughly, 182.9. So that's a, what was it, 3 point what million? 3 million?
3 million.
92.9. Okay, so so from now until 2022-23, we have 3 plus 2.7 is 5.7 plus 1.5. Hate doing math under 6.2 million. So we go from 155.6 to 195.9, which is a what is that, 40.3 million, of which 6.2 million of that increase comes from those big giant hotels being built with a subsidy of net. So I would say the vast majority is not coming from those hotels, as in fact, what's 40? What's 6.2 over 40? Yeah, roughly 50, less than 15, 85%. 85% of our growth is coming from if we did nothing. I would say, maybe even so. Anyway, so it's not. I'm curious not to why would the answer to Councilmember Murray's question be that the majority of the growth came from those big hotels? Or maybe I might have misheard you or misinterpreted.
That was not the question. The question was which hotel, if it didn't develop, would have the biggest economic impact to us, and that was the Disney Hotel.
Okay.
The growth still is the majority of our growth is our existing supply. We don't have enough supply to support additional growth, so it's important that we have those additional rooms.
So, well,
Tom?
so in full click mode, these are all built and go into the net out of 195.9 million in TOT. We only get 3 million from those 4.
6.2.
No, it's one each year. It's 2.5 million, 2.7 goes up to 3. So roughly, giving the benefit out, roughly 3 million a year we get net.
That doesn't include the property tax or sales tax.
How much? Well, that's small compared to the TOT. Okay, I just want to be clear. It's not. I think some people are assuming there's going to be this big boom in TOT because of these hotels, and it's a very, very small amount. It's 3%. It's less than 1.5%. About 1.5% of our total TOT will come from these 4 giant hotels, which would account for how many rooms, roughly?
1,800.
1,800 rooms.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Crane.
Thank you very much. Debbie, I think it's a good idea to have the hotels that haven't been built yet to be in the system. But as Debbie said, we get the sales tax and we get the property tax, which on a 4-diamond hotel is higher than on a 3-diamond. But you're also forgetting within 20 years, we get 100% of the TOT, and we do have a supply and demand problem. We do not have enough supply for the people who want to come here. It's been estimated that we actually need 2,600 4-diamond hotel rooms because we're losing those hotel nights and all the TOT and everything that goes with it to other cities around us. I mean, Garden Grove is chomping at the bit. They've got with the Great Wolf, they've got a 4-diamond there, which is up and running and doing well for the city. So we have to look into the future. These are higher paying jobs than a 3-diamond. People spend more money when they're in a 4-diamond. It's been estimated that valets make over $100,000 on these 4-diamond hotels. And that's not chump change. That's a pretty nice salary. And bartenders and waitresses. So I think that we just can't look at today's view. We have to look to the future. We do all things for the future. You support the Garden Walk hotels because I was on council when you do. And we're still paying for that TOT and the sales tax to pay for the parking structure. So that was forward thinking. Also in 1996 when you support the Disney bonds, the resort bonds, that was forward thinking. So we just can't live in a bubble. I think this is great to show what we're doing. And it's 3 million years, 3 million years that we wouldn't have had yesterday unless we had put these projects on the board. So I think it's great.
So not to argue, I'm just looking for clarity so everyone knows where we're at and what causes what and where it comes from. So it's a little, when you talk about revenue, we should probably have total revenue because you're taking a net, and then expenses, normally in a county you would have the revenue because we take in the revenue from the TOT. So if you take total revenue, and then the economic assistance would come out of expenditure, it wouldn't be a net revenue, I don't think, county-wise.
Actually, the current accounting standards require us to net the two.
Net the two. So let's say if you didn't net them, if you could, how much, let's say in year 21, 22, or let's say year 22, 23, how much are we paying in economic assistance? So if they built those without an incentive, let's say, hypothetically.
Which year? 21?
Take 21, 22. I think you're assuming they're all built at that point.
It's 18.9 million.
18.9 million. So you could add another 18.9 million in revenue if there wasn't a subsidy given, and then you take away the 18.9. Okay, and you end up with about 2.7. Okay.
Too.
So 18.9, and then in year 22, 23.
21 million.
21 million. So that would be 19, 205, 2, was that 215? 215, 216, 217, something like that. Okay. Councilmember Murray.
Thank you. First, I think it's important for anyone listening or with us today to know that no 4-diamond hotels are being built in any city, including on our border in Garden Grove, without some level of subsidy that actually in many cases, if not most, exceeds what Anaheim's put in their agreement. So to hypothesize these hotels being built without it doesn't really stand up to much scrutiny. What I would like to know is two things. One, what is our 30-year estimate net revenue to the general fund, to the city, if for the hotels that have been approved as part of the agreement? Do we have that in front? I know we had estimates done for that. I'm talking net revenue, even with the subsidy in place for the first 30 years.
From the original approval of those agreements, I don't have that with me here today.
Okay. I think it'd be helpful that we come back with that in the next budget workshop so residents do know the upside of these agreements to the general fund. The other is we had talked about the impact of not having these hotels because our rooms are capped. And so even with growth, our ability to capture revenue without these hotels is de minimis. So if the hotels were not built, at what year would we have a financial impact? Would we be potentially upside down with the PERS increases?
I guess you're assuming that nothing would have been built there at all.
I am assuming that because your council in 2002 approved a 50% subsidy and no hotels were built with it. So
I don't know why that has anything to do with anything. So you're
I'm saying at 50% they weren't built, at 70% we got agreements.
Your assumption is that nothing would have been built there. For example, a 3-star would not have been built there.
No, only the 4 Diamond that were part of the agreement is what I'm asking.
Yeah. So, and part of that, I guess you're asking, I'm just clarifying, your assumption is that nothing would have been built there
I'm
for
assuming
30
that
years.
the 4 Diamond hotels, that I'm only asking for the estimates of the hotels that are part of the agreement.
Yeah, so I just clarify.
I'm being very clear.
No,
I don't think they would be built without the agreement, no.
So nothing would have been built there.
I know in the last
hotel-wise.
158 years they weren't built without the subsidy, so I'm using some pretty good historic data.
There you go.
In fiscal 2020-2021, the net revenue from the 4 Diamonds is $1.5 million. Therefore, that's the point that would then cause us to be slightly under.
So even with the growth of the 3-star that would have been built without incentive, we peter out and then drop and are upside down without the 4 Diamond hotels that were approved.
Based on the information
Estimates.
we have today, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, that's you're making an assumption that nothing would have been built there without it. But again, to say that you're seeing tremendous growth in TOT, which is a wonderful thing. From 2018 to 2022, and wonderful thing to our visitors visit Anaheim, and for the resort district, and for Disneyland, driving that demand, and all those things. We're seeing tremendous growth in the hotel, and I think it's just important to note that the benefit from all the resort hotels is relatively small, is actually tiny compared to our total TOT. And even our increased TOT, it's only 15% of our increased TOT, and it's only 1.5% of our total TOT after they're built. So anyway, go ahead, please continue. Sorry to take you down that, but I think it's very important that we all have clarity to understand, because we're making big decisions based upon these budgets. We're making decisions based on staffing and areas we want to go into and capital expenditures and all that. So please continue.
So again, we've used our best professional judgment to put together a forecast that when all things are considered together, it's the most likely scenario. Now we'll take a look at the fiscal year 2018-19 preliminary budget for administrative departments. Our administrative departments consist of city administration, city clerk, city attorney, finance, and human resources. The administrative department's proposed budgets are shown here. Together, the administrative operating budgets make up 4% of the total city budget and 8.4% of general fund uses. City council has a preliminary budget of $1.3 million and city administration at $6 million. City attorney is proposing expenditures of $8.4 million and city clerk $2. These departments are predominantly funded by the general fund. Finance has a preliminary budget of $39 million and human resources $229.2 million. Their general fund uses are $12.1 million and $3.2 million respectively, with the balance comprised of information services, insurance, and benefit funds. When including general fund revenues, the cost of these support departments decreases. Each collects revenue from the enterprise funds for their share of the overhead costs for a total of $10.5 million, equal to about 30% of their costs. Our administrative departments are a crucial support system to ensuring the city can operate and provide services to our residents. Here are some highlights from our general government departments. Our city administration provides support on citywide initiatives such as fireworks sales, legislative affairs, homeless outreach, kindness campaign, and many more. The department also works diligently in enhancing communication efforts with residents online and with publications to ensure the community is aware of citywide projects, connecting with over 6 million people on social media. In the city attorney's office, legal staff prepared, reviewed, and executed nearly 700 agreements, ordinances, and resolutions, as well as reviewed over 14,000 violations of the city municipal code and state law. The city clerk's office provides core functions with official records, elections, and passport services. This past fiscal year, the office oversaw the council chamber audio and visual system upgrade and successfully implemented the lobbyist registration program that provides online access to lobbyist registry and quarterly reports. The next set of highlights comes from the supporting activities functional group, including finance and human resources. The hard work of staff in the finance department maintain consecutive awards of excellence in financial reporting and budgeting while improving the city treasurer investment portfolio rating. Additionally, our information services division created online services to include community engagement tools such as the Balancing Act and CIP story maps for the city budget, as well as expanded the open data portal to include GIS data, maps, and applications such as Andy's map. Our HR department has worked hard this past year with recruitment of new employees and training of existing employees to ensure we have the best people at Anaheim. Through April, HR had over 200 recruitment requisitions and reviewed over 24,000 job applications. By the end of the fiscal year, HR will have provided a total of 77 training classes with over 1,600 participants. This is the second year of our expanded community outreach efforts for the budget. This year, we went to the community with 3 outreach meetings, almost a month earlier than last year. Over 45 residents got a brief introduction to the preliminary proposed budget and had an opportunity to talk with department executives in smaller group settings and ask questions on issues and concerns they have in their districts. Some of the areas of interest include spaces for youth programs and services, clean and safe parks, public safety, and services for the homeless. In addition to questions and concerns, residents also took the opportunity to personally thank staff for their efforts, noting improvements such as better street lighting in their neighborhoods. Overall, the meetings allow staff the opportunity to build a stronger rapport with the community and better engage and educate residents of where the city's money comes from and where it goes. Additional budget resources such as the budget preview document, CIP story maps, and Balancing Act tool are available on the city website at anaheim.net/mycitybudget. This will allow the public to learn, share with one another, and provide feedback. So far, we have received 37 submissions on the Balancing Act tool and will remain online, allowing continued community participation. Here's a schedule of the upcoming workshops. Our second budget workshop will be next Tuesday when we'll hear from our police and fire and rescue departments. There'll be 2 additional workshops in June where we'll hear from the remaining operating departments, concluding with a public hearing on June 19th at the evening city council meeting. So thank you for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Okay, colleagues. Councilmember Murray.
That was for the last questioning.
Okay.
I will defer to other colleagues first, but would just like to acknowledge staff work at the end.
Councilmember Fessel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of questions of staff. Ms. Moreno, I'm not sure what the slide number it was, but you showed that our debt service is about 20% of our general fund. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, now, as our general fund has continued to grow over the last several years, is that, I believe the debt service remains relatively flat. Is that correct? So if it remains relatively flat, does that mean as a percentage, the percentage of our debt service as a percentage of our general fund is decreasing, or is our debt service continuing to increase? In other words, I need a little bit more perspective of our debt service, because we always get questioned about, Anaheim's level of debt. So give me a little primer here on our debt service.
I believe the percentage has remained fairly consistent because there's two really different components to our debt service. We have the flat debt service that's going to be traditional for our normal lease revenue bonds. So that remains at about our contribution of about $16 million a year towards that. And so that's rather flat through the life of the debt. The LPMR, so the lease payment measurement revenues, or the formulas that we put away money to make the debt service for the resort improvements done in 1997, is based on a formula according to our revenues. The debt itself actually escalates by 3% each year, but we put away based on a formula that incremental revenues from Disney and then 20% of non-Disney TOT. So those act differently. One is flat, one escalates, and could actually decrease based on performance of our revenues, which we saw during the recession.
And I understand also that actually we put away some funds against the LPMR in excess of the demand on the LPMR. Is that correct?
We are required to put it away based on the formula. Based on that formula, there has been an excess that has accumulated. That excess can only be used to repay those bonds.
Okay, so if you look at our debt service overall over the past, say, 5 years, it hasn't budged much from this 20% is what I'm hearing from you.
I don't believe it would have changed much.
Okay, so from the perspective of our debt overall, would you say that we were within safe limits particularly? Obviously, the bonding agencies feel that we're very fiscally responsible because they continue to give us very, very high bond service ratings. So I guess I'm searching from you as our treasurer, your opinion on our debt service ratio.
Yes, it's a moderate debt load, especially when you looked at the fixed component. It's fairly minimal. And with the larger amounts, those fluctuate with our revenue to provide the best, to try and mitigate any risk to the general fund. So the system has worked well for us to weather storms. And so, yes, my opinion is it's a fair debt load and has some flexibility in it that other jurisdictions may not have.
Okay, so for a takeaway for our residents is that we are not overburdened with debt, that we're managing the debt efficiently, and actually in terms of some, depending upon how it's calculated, some of our ratios may actually be slightly decreased. Would that be a fair appraisal?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, very good. Mr. Mayor, only one last question, and it refers to slide 13. And I believe your narrative on this regarding the PERS rates, I think that you said you were not accounting for any fee changes in our, we've talked about some fee modifications here within the last few meetings, and I think I heard you say that there was your calculations here did not reflect any fee changes.
That is correct.
Okay, so if that's the case then, and we may be taking some action within the next month or two to increase fees appropriately, we're not taking that into account anywhere here on our budget document, are we?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, so depending upon what happens, and we're talking fee increases of, I believe, between $1 and $2 million, if I can remember correctly, that would go, where does that go? Does that go to the general fund?
Yes, the user fees, those user fees would go to the general fund. And so if we looked at adjusting them no more, so being the lesser of the CPI since their last increase, or 15%, that would generate roughly $1.5 million a year, maybe a little less. We're still fine tuning that. We would anticipate that any implementation of those changes would take some time to properly notify folks. So they're prepared for it. We expect 60 to 90 days. So that would reduce that number some. So we think the first year impact could be roughly $1 million.
Okay, well, Ms. Moreno, I guess my question is, while we are taking into account potential future revenues from the hotels, which are not yet built, and they may be out as late as 2021, 2022, or 2022, 2023, and yet we're not taking into account additional general fund revenues, which may start within the next 6 months. Why is that?
Well, as we work through the process and get some of the feedback on the fee revenues, we'll have a better understanding of how we think those will go. And then we'll be working on recommendations over the next several weeks that we could present to you for additional services if you're interested.
Very well. I was just trying to understand why we take into account something that may be 5 or 8 years out, and we don't take into account something that may be around the corner, so to speak. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had my questions answered.
Thank you, Councilman Fessel. Mayor Pro Tem Moreno.
Thank you, Debbie, and to the staff who put this together. It's an art, it's a science mixed with art, right? So thank you. And the projections this year look like they played out the way that you shared with us last year. So I have a couple of questions that are not in here, but I think I would like to learn more of how we quantify some things in our city as it relates to our overall economy. One, you said that the unemployment rate is increasingly going down, right? So we are presumably at historic lows with unemployment or moving in that direction?
That's correct.
So folks are working. Revenues are increasing with our tourist industry, and the TOT is projected to increase even more. So I'm presuming we're expecting millions of more visitors. We have the convention center. Yet from what I could tell from the census data, poverty is also increasing in the city. So how do we make sense of why we are at the lowest unemployment rates amongst the lowest in our city? Revenues are going up for our private sector, yet poverty and our general fund is increasing, yet poverty in the city overall is increasing.
We can look into that. I believe there are some information being prepared in some other departments that may lend to that specific question.
So that I would assume that might be the Beacon Economics report. Is John here? Is that where that data might be?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I don't know if this will be in that report, but I don't know what the metrics would be for us to be able to quantify the cost of poverty to the general fund. That is, do we have to spend more when the gaps between wages and housing and services needed in the city to be provided to spaces that perhaps our infrastructure wasn't built for because we are having more folks live in our city? We know that what you mentioned, these large revenue growth, some of it will come from these hotels. They're promised to bring 3,000 permanent jobs. Those folks will have to live somewhere in an already struggling housing market. They'll have to drive streets and use sewage and water in already strained infrastructure. So we're going to have to invest in that. So is there a metric that we use to look at the cost of poverty in a city as it relates to our general fund?
No, that's not something that we currently track and identify.
I would like to, it would be very helpful, I think, to me to understand that. I think that certainly the resort district has been a blessing in our city. We know that we have an $80 million surplus, but I keep getting asked, and op-eds are written, that we have the surplus, the city must be mismanaged if we're not able to provide the high quality of life that one would think we would have given the investments made in the resort and the surpluses that we get. So I'd really like to figure out how we can explain that to our residents and to ourselves in terms of our use of budgets. So for example, I was just in a meeting where we still can't dream about building new community centers or accelerating the building of streets without a gas tax. We needed the gas tax to accelerate infrastructure, capital infrastructure in our streets. The development of parks in ways that we would like to see, or the maintenance of parks. So I guess that's where I'm at a loss of how to explain to residents and to the public at large that given all of this revenue coming in, why we could barely afford to open up a pool 7 months out of the year.
We can certainly look at having an economist possibly identify some of those costs of poverty. Some of the things that we talked about why we don't have more revenues available is that I think by policy over the years, we have chosen to place a higher burden of our service costs on visitors and not to our community. So there are a number of taxes that we don't have that other jurisdictions may have, and that makes a difference.
So that becomes a backfill to keep our taxes and fees low. But as a result, quality of life is not exactly what we would think, given the revenues that we have.
Correct. So, I mean, we typically know, we haven't run the numbers for this year. We've said that the resort produces in another 25% after it pays its costs. It produces 25% of what we spend in our general fund. So in other words, if we didn't have the resort, our residents, based on what they pay today, would get only 75% of the services they get.
Well, we'd have a lot less people if we didn't have the resort. We'd be Orange or Fullerton. We'd have much fewer people, much fewer services needed. Other industries may have come in. Who knows, right? So I think, again, working off of hypotheticals, we know that we become the largest city in part because of the attraction, right, and the jobs that it brings. I'm just trying to think of how we can keep thinking about where this revenue is going, because I know we're very streamlined. Our staffing ratios are super thin, super low, I guess, or super high. We're struggling in our staffing ratios because we can't afford to hire folks because of concerns of burden, but also just the impact on the general fund. And so I guess I'd like to figure out how we can get a consistent report through our budget of that cost, this gap between the seeming counterintuitive thing that our revenues are increasing and everything's great economically in terms of the outlook, but yet folks are still being pushed out of their apartments because of rent. Folks still have streets that they're struggling with, and we still have one public swimming pool in the entire city. So, and we struggle to provide basic services at times to the city. So that's the context I'm trying to figure out. How then can we improve the quality of life for our residents that matches what is presumably a very strong economic outlook? So it's a rhetorical question. That's not one for you to answer, honestly. That's just something I'm just trying to figure out this counterintuitive data and how we might engage it through our budget.
So we're seeing our revenues grow at a fairly decent rate. I mean, would you call it a fairly decent rate from now till, let's say, the next 3 years?
Yes.
4 years. So what rate do we have to grow just to keep current service levels the same as they are today? Because we have our expenses are increasing by how much?
It's roughly 4% a year.
So if we need to grow 4% a year just to stay even.
And one of the larger drivers of some of those increases, as you can see on the chart, is going to be our PERS expenses.
That's certainly part of it. What's the other part of it? I mean, is it
when you look at 20 million, so I'm sorry, we're at 12 million of the $15 million increase between fiscal year 22 and 23.
yeah.
It
takes it all.
It's 4 of that is going to be PERS.
Sure. But let's say this next year, 18-19, or between 18-19 and 19-20, we grow 13 to 29. Was that 16 million?
The bulk of it is going to be labor. 75% of our general fund expenses are labor.
So it'd be labor increases in. Is that assuming that our contracts, we have a certain increase in the contracts, or is it assuming that our, I guess, is assuming that labor increases CPI, or we have contracts that increase CPI, or how do we?
It is assuming the contracts we currently have in place, the step increases that employees would be entitled to under those current contracts. There are no other wage increases contemplated.
So all this shows no, if we, on all of our future contract, let's say contracts we enter into, police and fire and general employees and management, this is assuming no increases across the board in any of the contracts.
In order to preserve services at the current level, yes.
And does this budget just preserve services at the current level?
That's correct.
So for the next 5 years, assuming no increases in any contracts, and assuming no recession, because that's part of the assumption for the next 5 years, which is probably a big, I mean, a couple of years it may be, but the next 5 years be a very long economic growth. So assuming no recession, no increase in contracts, we cannot, in pretty robust growth, revenue growth, we still can only, there'll be no money for anything beyond what we're doing. Or whatever we do, we're going to have to change what we're doing and cut something to do something else.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to touch on some of the points that were made with regard to poverty levels and our budget, especially if we're going to be looking to have some reporting come back to council and for the public's review. First, I would appreciate if any of that reporting touched on the issues with the cost of housing, which is not a derivative of the city, but a derivative of other issues that the city is contending with, like every other city in Southern California. The fleet of middle income jobs, the aviation industry, manufacturing, aerospace, et cetera, that have left Southern California as a result of policies not at municipal level, but at a state and federal level. The cost of transportation and the inability to expand our transportation programs and the menu of transportation programs from affordable to the more extravagant, with the shifting of things like Prop 42 and other funding, which meant that we weren't building new infrastructure over the last 20 years. And the increases of PERS and even the politicization of how we invest in PERS that have limited PERS' ability as a fund to grow and provide. It's important that our residents know that less than 2% of Disneyland's workers live in Anaheim, so trying to make a correlation that there's a larger number that work in the resort, but to make the correlation that the resort is in any way directly responsible for poverty when all of these other factors coalesce to make Southern California one of the top most expensive places from a quality of living, cost of living standpoint in the country, is really more to the bottom line and the common denominator than having the resort, which is providing services. And then I really look forward, and I hope residents will watch, because if you were listening tonight, you might think that Anaheim's not investing in our neighborhoods and community, but the number of community centers, particularly this year with the opening of Ponderosa, which has been developed for the last several years, Mira Loma, the number of pocket parks and skateboard parks, and the investments in police, the investments in other public safety services, healthcare, mobile units, and the investments in our employees have had a real net income to quality of life services for our residents. So I really look forward to those additional workshops. And I'd just like to close by saying to you, Ms. Moreno, and your entire team sitting with you, to our city manager's office, and all of our departments who work to bring us to this point, because it is an extraordinary lift. This is I'm going into my 8th and final budget adoption. All 8 years, we have forecasted accurately, and even so conservatively that the mid-year we're able to reinvest, even if it's just one time, more services into the community. But it's been a balanced budget 8 years in a row. It's been a unanimously adopted budget 8 years in a row because of the amount of community input and the quality and caliber that has gone into the budget each and every year. And that doesn't happen by accident. And it takes an extraordinary effort all year long for it to come to us and be shared with the public at this point. So I just want to say thank you. It has been an honor and a privilege to work with all of you and your team. You do really err on the side of caution, and you're conservative in your approach to be protective of our residents and our service levels and our employees, and it shows year after year. So our residents should be very proud. We have a city that struggles, like all cities, with the high cost of living, but we are investing in our community, in our people, and we are always looking at that bottom line. Anaheim has, for everyone's benefit, some of the highest levels of affordable housing in the entire county, and it is partly why we may have a lower socioeconomic level that we are also trying to serve, far more than other cities, particularly in the South County, which limit their affordable housing. We have really stepped up. There's more to be done with every city in the county and across Southern California, but it's not a reflection on the city of Anaheim, our staff, or our leadership, that we're struggling with the same issues that others are as well. So I look forward to those additional reports, and definitely look forward to the service levels increasing. And always on the bottom line, Anaheim has less taxes. We're taking less out of the pockets of our residents to fund these services as a result of the economy and the conservative approach to our budgeting year after year. So thank you.
Councilmember Crane.
Thank you very much. I was going to say a lot of what my colleague Chris Murray said, but I will divert that. It was just in the papers that California now is the 5th largest economy in the world, surpassing the UK. But yet, with that money, we also have the highest poverty and homelessness in the country. So that is it's a wonderful thing. It's a plus on one side and a black mark on the other. And for those of us who want to get more housing and more affordable housing, we need to, as I've said, I'm screaming about it, go to Sacramento. We need to have CEQA reform. So anybody out there who's a developer or who's a chamber member who wants to have more affordable housing, and even if you're an advocate for affordable housing, you need to contact your representatives in Sacramento. CEQA reform is a big key to building more housing. And to you, Ms. Moreno, and your staff, great job. This is my 14th year for budgets, and they've always come in on time and balanced. So it is a work effort from the whole city staff. So congratulations to everybody who has a footprint on this budget. None of us likes to say no to neighbors and to communities. We want community centers in every neighborhood. That's not a reality. Ponderosa Park is a great example of investments in the Platinum Triangle and user fees. $13 million of developers' user fees was used to build the Ponderosa Community Center. And the ongoing maintenance of that facility is being paid by the ATID, which the hoteliers have put on their portfolios. So it's outside visitors who are paying for the operation and maintenance. We only are paying for the employees who work at that Ponderosa Resource Center. So keep that in mind. The Resort Center does throw off $80+ million a year, but that money goes to pay for police and fire and libraries and parks. So that money is well used by our city and by our finance director. So again, congratulations to everybody who had a hand in this budget. And I look forward to the next 2 public hearings and seeing how much we can squeeze out of the budget. Thank you.
Councilmember Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's one thing I look for in a budget, especially my own at home, is especially projected, because I don't know that my husband would get a raise or be lucky that we got a raise, but I'm just saying, when you have line items that are compressed like that with the PERS, is there a way you can actually get a line item just for different departments? I'm looking at actually asking a breakdown on the departments for pensions when it comes to fire and police, because I'm thinking that that's what's impacted and will continue to impact our budget as we move forward. And then we need to consider that as far as any contracts that come up also. So I'm just trying to see if you can skew that off so we get the feel for it, even if it's in the last, give us some years before this and then show what it's now and then how it will be projected. Is that something I can ask for?
We can show some of that information now, just so you can see what the increases look like citywide. And then when we present when we have the final budget document available at the end of the month, that information will all be there as well.
Yes, because I hear other cities are really having a struggle with that, and I think it would be good to assure us in those levels that our city is not in any jeopardy that way. And then also, I would also like to see about the bonds that we pay. I know that was a real heavy subject when I first learned about it, and I want to make sure that it's presented and then defined to the public what that's all about.
Yes, there's an entire section dedicated to our long-term liabilities now included in our budget. It's been included in the last few years, so that additionally will be available at the end of the month. But going back to your question about what PERS costs look like, this is going to be citywide. This is the net cost to the city. So 1819 is 69.1, and you can see by 22-23, 103.8.
So I can see some big jumps there. That do they correlate then with your projected? Is that
yes? Those so that our projections include the change in the discount rate that PERS has adopted, and also the mid range of what they have projected for some changes in actuarial assumptions. They'll have more information available in probably the fall on that. So we've taken into account all those items in our projections.
Is there a way we can get a copy of all this, or is it just going to be in the workshop on the video or the?
It will have the budget document available at the end of the month, and you all will get that. It'll be online, but we'll also have printed copies for you, as well as that supplemental document that has the real line item detail. So we'll have all that, and if you have any other information you need, we'll be happy to get that for you.
Okay, so those are my two asks, is about this department. Is there another department behind miscellaneous that's another big push that would be at those? It looks like it's, well, at least for the police, it's like a 3 to 4 point difference. Is there another one behind that? Police, fire, then what? Administrative staff?
Then it's everybody else. It's the sworn police and fire, and then everybody else is in miscellaneous.
Okay, so like you wouldn't put staff up there like as the next big jump to look at or analyze or anything like that?
I'm sorry, I wasn't understanding that question.
Well, when you did the presentation, you had little pots and parts of the pie that were the biggest percentages. So what would be the third percentage in your in your
Well,
mapping of
the
the
next
budget?
largest department would be community services.
Oh,
For
community
general fund.
services. Okay. Well, maybe could you throw that one in there too? Just because I want to see, what our options are.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kring, did you have another? Okay. Councilmember Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask you if you could return to slide 13 again? So I just want to focus on the grade outline sources over under recurring uses. And so this helps highlight that the budget is balanced for the 2018-19 year. But moving forward in 5 years, the 1.1 parentheses tells us
based on what we know today, as we get to the negative in 21, 22, that we may have some revenue challenges, but it's hard enough to put together a budget for the next year because you're looking 18 months ahead, let alone going out 5 years. So a lot changes. By the time you get out past the third year, it gets pretty rough. But we've always tried to look at that to make sure that we're not seeing really big gaps. I think in the size of our budget, you're looking at a pretty small percentage, a gap right there. So that could change.
okay, and so the only other change I think was based on the previous meetings that you had with councils and pairs and singly. You had brought figures that didn't show the anticipated trends in occupancy tax for some hotels, and they've been added to this particular presentation.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the change. We've moved the assumptions forward on hotel revenue.
Because the development is anticipated to be so robust, we have changed the methodology that we use and didn't strictly consider things under construction right now, especially that we were seeing, most economists are saying in the next 2 years still look to be some good growth. We've thought that it made sense to go ahead and include a little bit more than we would have normally included.
Okay, and then just lastly, so tonight, our last item is a luxury hotel. It's been pulled. But that wasn't part of any of these calculations.
That hotel actually is in this.
Is that considered a 4-diamond hotel?
No.
For your purposes? Okay.
Or if it is, it's not in the incentive, right? It's not yet. It's 4-diamond, but it's not part of the subsidy program.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I
know. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just a couple of clarifying things, Debbie. So in terms of community services, which is the actual services provided regularly to our residents through community centers, park ranger programs to keep the parks secure and presumably maybe engage them in how to keep them safer. Our swimming pool, the one that we have in the city. So, and maintenance of all these things, that takes up 10% of our general fund.
number sounds right, but we're trying to verify. Sorry, there's a lot of percentages too.
Right, so from my recollection from a year ago, it was about 10%.
I think it's roughly 10%.
Right, 10% of our general fund, and that seems to be consistent in the budgets that have been approved over the last decade. So the extent to which we're truly investing to grow the services for our residents, we pretty much have remained stagnant as it relates to the percentage of our budget, just like the debt service has remained constant percentage-wise, so has our commitment to community services over the years, right?
Our percentages for all departments have remained fairly consistent.
Right. And so while, again, revenue growth is increasing in the city, wealth is growing for some in the city, our actual general fund dollars in terms of commitments to community services has remained stagnant.
It's 10% of a growing pie.
Right.
So I think a lot of the increases what that says is if those percentages have remained consistent is that everyone has participated in some of those increases.
Right. So I guess my thinking here, and then I think 7% of our general fund budget goes to fixing our streets and capital infrastructure of our transportation. I guess streets would be considered part of the transportation system of our city. So 17% is what you have up on the graph, is about how much we spend on those two combined. It looks like, if memory serves me right, that those are the two categories combined under quality of life. I say that because I think it's important for us to think of budgets as reflecting our values. And so if budgets are truly a reflection of our values, 2 out of $3 are going to public safety, 1 out of $2 going to policing, but 10 cents on the dollar going to youth, family, community-based programs and services that often can be part of our work to prevent a lot of the ills that we see in our city. I also think that overall, as was mentioned earlier, it's important to know what's going to be the total revenue of these subsidized hotels over the next 20 years. But I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that those subsidies are going to amount to $700 million over 20 years per the projections. And one can only think and imagine what we can do with $700 million extra. And if those hotels were not built as 4-star hotels, they presumably could be built as 3 stars, which would still be hundreds of millions of dollars. So I just think, again, that to me, I'd like to see a budget that has more than 10% in it for community services, because that, to me, is what helps to mitigate the cost of poverty when we have low unemployment but very low wages in the city. Regardless of the industry, we do have low wages in the city.
Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to share that having done this for 8 years, our residents have considered public safety to be one of their highest quality of life services and have appreciated the investment the city's been making in those departments, especially in the wake of the recession when other cities were cutting back. So I think most of us agree that the safety of our residents is the highest priority of a municipal agency, and then we work and do a robust effort to add additional quality of life programs above and beyond that. But the first and foremost priority is to make sure people are safe in our community. So, and the fact that those departments handle 26 million annual visitors on top of the 350,000 residents who live here, it's an extraordinary lift, and it does cost a significant portion of the general fund, but it is a priority of most of the residents, if not all, that I've ever communicated with. So, and that have reached out to the city. One other thing I really want to underscore is, and it will be part of our budget coming forward, I believe, but just want to make sure residents know, a few years back, and you were instrumental in making this happen, we started putting together a per capita budget estimate so that residents really know where we're putting not just those operational dollars on a per capita basis, but where those capital dollars are going on a per capita basis citywide, and really showing that we evenly distribute services in the city from east to west. And so hope that will continue to be part of the final budget as well. Thank you, Ms. Moreno.
If I could ask for, I went down the line of questioning earlier about the revenues, net revenues, gross revenues, things like that. If I could get this next week, if you could, or 2 weeks, the breakdown of what revenues, kind of the gross revenue, and then how much each hotel subsidy would be for, on your assumptions here on the years 2021, 22, and 22, 23. Basically, what you told me, put that in number form, but break it down in further detail on what hotels you're planning on being built, when, and all that type of stuff.
Yes, we can include that. Also,
I want to say the sources over or under, it goes down to our reserves, which are $34.3 million. I think it's important, and maybe my concern is just even showing this on the graph form on the out years, that we do budget away from, I see our reserves dropping even a little bit, 0.7 and 1.1. I think we should always not budget to spend reserves. Reserves are for rainy day purposes. I know Councilmember Murray alluded to it. For the last 8 years, we've balanced the budget. And balancing the budget means not balancing it on reserves. Sometimes reserves come into play because there are unforeseen circumstances, but you should never balance the budget on reserves like had been done before. When we came into office, remember it was prior 2 years, the city had actually said there's a balanced budget, but in reality, balanced the budget by spending reserves. And yes. Yeah, no, I get having to spend reserves, but when you actually balance your budgets, maybe we have a difference of opinion, but I don't think a balanced budget means balancing, digging into reserves. I think balanced budget means your revenue equals your expenses. And on reserves generally, I know the Municipal Finance Directors Association recommends 2 months of operating, which means it should be around 65 million. We've talked about this before. You're comfortable with the current number at 35 million because there's other reserves that in case of emergency you could pull from things like retired medical, things like that. But I think it's important. I think we're at the kind of the minimum amount for reserves, and I get nervous at less than 1 month operating. But I defer to your opinion. And I want to finish by saying thank you. This is a tremendous amount of work.
Tom, I have
Ms. Marino. We just have a couple more questions. Councilmember Kring.
Thank you. Not questions, just a comment. Every time we have a budget hearing, a couple of people always mention the $700 million we're rebating to the hoteliers and what we could do with that $700 million. That is a big number, but you have to remember, we don't have that money. It's not in a pot somewhere. We're not taking it and giving it to hoteliers. They have to earn that money first. And then part of what they make in the TOT is rebated back to them. So it's not as if there's a pot of gold and unicorns. That's not happening. Isn't that correct, Ms. Moreno?
I'm sorry, I got distracted with the unicorns.
The fairy dust too. No, the $700 million that several people in the dais constantly bring up and say, what could we do with that money? And that's a big pot of money. But the hoteliers, we don't have a pot of money over here and writing a check to $700 million. They have to be operational, and they have to send that money to us from the TOT, and then we're rebating over many years, several decades, back to them. So that money is not in the city coffers. Is that correct?
It is correct that we have to collect the money first before we remit it back to the hoteliers.
So there is no $700 million somewhere hidden in the city?
I can guarantee you we have not hidden $700 million in the city.
Well, I appreciate that because you and I could have a nice vacation. Thank you so much. Just wanted that for clarification.
Councilmember Fessel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to, just as my last thought on some of the discussions we had here, I want to thank my council colleagues for voting unanimously here earlier in the year. In fact, it was, I think, mid last year, 2017, where you supported an idea of mine where when we do have a budget surplus, which we may or may not have from year to year, that we have no less than, and I'll give the no less than to some credit to my council colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Moreno, but we will, if we have a budget of any size or a surplus of any size, that we allocate no less than 25% back to community services. And I'm not sure if we've had a chance to do that this year or last year, but when we do have a budget surplus, which we may from time to time, I'm very happy that we took that action, and I do appreciate my council colleagues in voting for that. Thank you.
In conclusion, I started to thank you before. Thank you, Ms. Marino, for the accuracy of the numbers and your best guess throughout, which is very difficult projecting in the future. None of us know, we think we could think and hope a recession won't happen. We could hope that, and think that have assumptions are based on salary level, and even PERS numbers are all, as we get out there, pretty tough to predict. But appreciate you giving the effort and using your best estimate on that. And also currently, I appreciate you. I mentioned this earlier, balancing the budget without drawing on reserves. And appreciate all the work from all the departments going into this. It's a big effort to figure out how much money we're going to have next year, how much we have to spend, set your priorities within your departments. And I know that comes from a bottom up from everybody in the city, all employees in the city get involved in figuring out what the needs and are to best serve the people of Anaheim. So tremendous effort, Madam City Manager. Thank you for really appreciate the tremendous amount of information this year, and it's very helpful. So thank you very much. Okay, with that, now's the time for public comments. Are there any members of public who wish to be heard on the? This is on the.
This is on the workshop.
On the workshop, yes, on the workshop. Welcome. Not workshop. Okay, we'll get that. Okay, you might want to stay up there. Okay. Anyone on the workshop? Anyone on the workshop? Welcome.
Murray over here. You said you have affordable housing in Anaheim? Where?
Ma'am, the way this works is it's just comments. It's not, there's not a dialogue going back because that would have to be put on the.
I want to know where the affordable housing is. That's my problem. Where's the affordable housing in Orange County, in Anaheim that she says we have? Where?
It's a good question, and she doesn't have to.
I'm happy to
respond
answer
if you don't
if you'd
want
like.
to. Okay, if you'd like to go.
Anaheim has one of the largest Section 8 programs, and we did a 10-year program where we implemented some of the most affordable housing in all of Orange County. Is it affordable by standards that exist today in Southern California? It is still very expensive to live in Southern California, but that's not unique to Anaheim. We have some of the greatest affordable housing supply that exists in Orange County here in Anaheim.
So,
and a lot of it is right here in District 3. We have a number of our District 3 residents here who would be happy to share with you exactly where and take you on a tour.
Councilmember, you know what? I'm going to have to interrupt. I've got the eye from our city attorney. It's not on the agenda tonight to discuss affordable housing. We have to limit. By law, we can't have a big debate on affordable housing because it's not on the agenda, publicly noticed.
Well, no, she brought it up during the meeting, and this is comments, and that's my comment.
Where is this? No criticism, ma'am, to you. I see why you asked the question. It's
and
just
Section 8, oh yeah, you have a great Section 8 program, but nobody wants to take it. None of the houses want to take it.
Yeah, we can't get a debate on affordable housing tonight because it's not on the agenda. But thank you for your comment, ma'am. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Bob Donaldson, 2045 South June. What came out interesting here is somebody was trying to sell the subsidies as being a benefit to us and the city and for the people that work in the city. What I saw up here on the projection is we're talking about increase in PERS, which I assume is their retirements. Now, what's happening is the city decides we're going to give 70% of our TLT for these new hotels to them, profit to them, and yet the PERS is going to increase. We're taking that money away. So from a worker standpoint, I said, why do we give more profit back to the wealthy and take away from the worker? Because that PERS is a benefit a lot of people come to work for, and they go into public service because of those retirements. And now they're always under attack. But what hurts Anaheim is that we're giving, and it's like to Disney, it's $265 million. That's a lot of money that goes towards workers' retirements. And that could be, we wouldn't even be worried about it, in my opinion, we had all that TOT. And to think that we're not going to build hotels around here, you see hotels that are building. And it was kind of interesting, you talked about this new hotel that's a 4-star that's not even involved with the rebate. I'm not sure how that came about, but it's, you got a hotel that's built. And there's other hotels building. And so
free market is what's called.
So my main thing is like I say, is I think it's, most of us understand that we're giving money back to the rich on that. And that's affecting everybody in Anaheim, and it's affecting every worker that is under PERS. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on the workshop?
Hi, just a quick comment. As far as the TOT goes, I mean, it's absolutely asinine to think that these hotels will not be built without the subsidy. As far as the subsidy goes, it's absolutely asinine that tourists pay the TOT, and yet the TOT is refunded to the hoteliers. It's absolutely asinine that Disney fought so hard against the $1 gate tax that would have benefited the city because they didn't want to charge their tourists an extra $1, and have since raised their admission price at least 6 times and has a fluctuating admission depending on what day you choose to go. This situation with the resort industry and their subsidies needs to end. An example is what is on the public hearing tonight, which is a 4-diamond hotel that is being built without tax subsidies. Imagine that. I don't know.
Any other comments on the workshop? Then we're going to go, okay, see none, now's the time for comments on the, let's see, next is the closed session agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any additions or deletions to the closed session agenda?
There are none.
Now's the time for public comments on the closed session agenda. Welcome.
William Fitzgerald, spokesperson for Anaheim Home, homeowners maintaining our environment. I want to speak on item number 2 of the closed session concerning the scab laborers who are going to be making heavy political donations this year to the City Council. But first of all, I'd like to mention I'm really proud to be here for a change, that we have these members of the unions that came out, left their home, took the day off, whatever, sacrificed to be here in order to help their brothers and sisters, labor workers there at Disneyland. And that is something I'm really impressed with, that the union members stick together, and those union members at Disneyland are making big sacrifices, so forth, and are trying to get a livable wage. So I'd like to thank every one of those union members who came here to help the Disneyland workers. Now, on the item number 2, why are you having the discussion with the association on election year? Because all of you know that tens of thousands of dollars in political donations come from that association, and that you will be giving them everything they want. In exchange, you would be getting those who will be running for re-elections, like Lucille Kring for supervisor and Chris Murray for supervisor will be receiving it. And in exchange, you will making it very expensive for public safety for the people of Anaheim. And remind you before, the city of Santa Ana is having financial problems now, but they had troubles. And what they did is they closed up their fire department and hired the union people of the Orange County Fire Authority to take over their fire services. The savings was over $10 million a year, and that's a smaller city than Anaheim, so our savings would be probably over $10 million a year, things that could be going for the people and for parks and fix our roads and so forth. If we switch over, get rid of the scabs that we have now, and go to the Orange County Fire Authority and let them take over the fire services for Anaheim. And mention that once they took over Santa Ana's Fire Authority did a much superior job, a better job, And so less money, better job. The only difference is you're not going to get the political donations during election year. And it's really disgusting that that's the one thing you work for. And it's unfortunately all 7 of you are so inconsiderate that the meeting started at 5 o'clock and you'll delay it for what, half an hour while all these good people are waiting to be here for at 5 o'clock.
Anyone else like to speak under the closed session agenda? See none, we'll recess to closed session.
What is the password again for the Wi-Fi?
I have it on my, do you want me to put it on? No, okay. Yeah, I wrote it down. It's this weird long one. And it's for